and have him make the decision and do it on his terms. Let's go back to Willie James Inman, our CBS News correspondent who is following the president in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Willie, what do you have?
Very bitter in some ways.
Hey there, Christine. Well, we are in position here at the Rehoboth Beach Library. It's a spot that the president doesn't stay far away from if he wants to make a statement, but no word yet in terms of if or when the president will come out and speak publicly. Of course, as you have been mentioning, as we've been talking about, the president is recovering from COVID-19. He is in isolation. And what a weekend to make this decision to, of course, be with his family. We knew that the First Lady has been with the president amid this COVID-19 diagnosis. Clearly, there was a conversation behind the scenes going on with not only the family, but amongst those close to President Biden. We knew from reporting that he has grown frustrated and, of course, being isolated in this situation amid these reports of Democrats coming out and saying that the president should step aside. But clearly, we would love to see and hear from the president today. But he came out with this statement on X, on Twitter, to say to the American people that he will not seek another term, but still behind closed doors here as he recovers from COVID.
Willie, I'd like to read another statement, a letter actually from the president regarding his endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris. He writes, "My fellow Democrats, I've decided not to accept the nomination and to focus all my energies on my duties as president for the remainder of my term. My very first decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Kamala Harris as my vice president, and it's been the best decision I've made. Today, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." Willie, are you hearing any word today of whether or not we will hear from the vice president?
Yeah, that's certainly an open question. I anticipate some type of statement coming from her to talk about this situation. But I also want to talk about what's going on out there in the American public. They're seeing this for the first time, of course, as we're getting it. Vice President Kamala Harris has been with the president since he decided to choose her as his running mate. And as Margaret Brennan pointed out on Face the Nation earlier today, this is about votes. And there have been a lot of black voters, I'm talking about black women in particular, who see Harris as the next party leader, who see Harris as someone who can carry the torch, that it's their turn to seek leadership in terms of leading the country. So Kamala Harris has a lot of fierce support within the black community. So does Joe Biden. But at the same time, Harris is someone who could potentially bring about that coalition. It's an open question as to whether or not she'll be able to be as powerful as President Biden was at the top of the ticket just several years ago. But clearly, this is something that we'll continue to watch, and we'll bring it to you first once we hear from the Vice President, Christine.
Some great points there, Willie. And on that note, I'd like to bring in now Ed Gordon, anchor at BET. He actually interviewed the president just this past week. Ed, your reaction here today on hearing this news?
Yeah, well, I can't say that I'm surprised, but it is an extraordinary place in history that this moment will take. I think when I sat with him on Tuesday, Christine, he had all intention to continue this fight and really believed, I think, that he was going to be the nominee and truly believed he was going to be able to defeat Donald Trump. So I think between this past Tuesday and the announcement today, he started to read the tea leaves. If nothing else, this man is political and understands there are certain points, political points, that you just can't walk away from. And with the idea of Nancy Pelosi not being full-throated in her support, even someone like Jim Clyburn, who was in fact full-throated, just listening to him during an interview today, you started to get the idea that this may be coming.
You certainly did. The drumbeat did get louder and louder since that debate with former President Trump. That is for certain. Ed, I'd like to get your take just on the gravity. I know we have a long road ahead of us. However, if the vice president is in fact endorsed and nominated as the new Democratic nominee at the Democratic National Convention, which will begin on August 19th, just a few weeks from now, the gravity of the fact that she is a woman and she is a black woman here in our nation's history.
I think Ed O'Keefe hit it earlier when you spoke to him. We're in uncharted territories, Christine. I don't know that we know. Will America be ready for a black female? We'll see. People said that about Barack Obama. There were many who believed that at that point in time, America wouldn't be ready for an African-American president. And he was able to break a glass ceiling that many of us thought would never be broken. I think one of the things that we've got to be cognizant of, though, even with this endorsement, there are forces in the Democratic Party that do not want her leading that ticket. And we're about to see whether there's going to be some political wrangling around that or whether they will walk in lockstep with the idea that this is, in fact, probably the easiest route for Democrats to follow, but more specifically to give Joe Biden the ability to say, this is who I am putting my belief behind. You should, in fact, do the same.
Well, he did put the word out that he is, in fact, endorsing his vice president. So I do wonder if that was meant for everyone in the Democratic Party to hopefully just fall in line. I know you are close to the vice president. You mentioned earlier that you said, is the nation ready to elect its first female black president? Is Kamala Harris, in your opinion, ready for the road ahead that's ahead of her?
Yeah, I think, and I'm bothered sometimes by that question. I think African Americans in these positions get that question far more than we give to others. I think, 3.5 years in the White House has certainly readied her more than any other person on the Democratic side. She is a bright woman. She's been in politics for a long time. She certainly, I believe, has the ambition now. She stood stalwart next to Joe Biden. But someone in her position would certainly, I think, rise to this occasion. And I think she's ready, able and willing to say, I want to take this task on.
What are some of those personal qualities that you know about her that you feel will help in the road ahead?
Well, I think what we've seen her do at the outset when she was given the idea of handling reproductive rights, a lot of people have suggested, that she stumbled and failed on the border issue. But I think that that's one of those issues that everyone who's been front and center of that, and I'm talking about presidents who were seated in office, have had an opportunity to, use the bully pulpit, but haven't been able to get their arms around the best way to handle that. But she, as many people have suggested, found her footing around reproductive rights. She's a brilliant woman, a great orator, and the energy that she's going to bring to this, if in fact she becomes the nominee, is extraordinary. We've seen her in debates before. We've seen her during Senate hearings. She's quick on her feet. I think she'll be a formidable opponent.
Ed Gordon, anchor at BET. Ed, we appreciate you taking some time with us, and if you wouldn't mind, please do stand by as we continue our coverage of the CBS News special report. I'd like to bring in Joel Payne once again, our CBS political contributor. And Joel, I'd like to just continue on this notion of Vice President Kamala Harris receiving the Democratic nomination in these upcoming weeks. Your take on the historic choice for the Democratic Party she would be?
Yeah, obviously historic for a number of reasons. She would be the first woman president, and obviously she's already broken history, made history as the first African-American Asian woman vice president. Picking up on Ed's comments, I do think there has been a very fulsome conversation within the Democratic establishment in recent weeks about if we reach this point where Joe Biden decided to step aside from this race, what's next? And in many ways, I actually think that's what has somewhat delayed the decision by President Biden. I believe the lack of a uniform, belief or agreement on a plan B is maybe what delayed this decision somewhat. You have many in the party who want an open primary. They want to hear from the other, what they believe stars of the Democratic Party, whether it's a Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania or Governor Whitmer in Michigan, many others, Raphael Warnock in Georgia, Mark Kelly in Arizona, et cetera, right? But then you also have a very strong group of Democrats who believe that there is no other choice than Vice President Kamala Harris for many reasons. One, she has really shown herself to be a stalwart surrogate for President Biden and for this administration, has been a partner in governing, and has been somebody who has really built a profile around a couple of issues that we know are going to be very engaging this time around. The issue of abortion, which she is probably the foremost spokesperson within the Democratic Party right now, and also issues of consequence to young voters like climate change and student debt relief. She went on a very much ballyhooed, college tour in recent months that I believe has really rebooted her reputation with those populations of voters. Not to mention just the obvious fact, let's just say the quiet part out loud, Black women are the strongest, most reliable part of the Democratic voting coalition. And I think that any attempt to pass over Kamala Harris, who has been a very strong and very representative vice president, I think will be received poorly. I know that maybe the polling says something mixed about that, but I do think a party that has historically had a tortured history with recognizing and representing Black voices would have a lot of challenges to keep that coalition together, which is highly dependent on engaged Black voters, if something like that were to happen. So to me, there was no other choice but for Joe Biden to endorse Kamala Harris here. I would not be surprised if you see many other Democrats do that. I think just in the time we've been talking, Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal has endorsed Vice President Harris. I imagine you'll see many folks do that. I think a name to watch, a person to watch in terms of how she will treat the news of the Harris endorsement would be Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, somebody who recent reporting has suggested wanted an open process if Biden were to step aside, as opposed to immediately moving the nomination to Kamala Harris. So there is a lot here, and I believe the next few days will be of great consequence to figure out whether or not Kamala Harris's endorsement from Joe Biden will transfer to the rest of the party.
All right, Joel Payne, CBS News political contributor. It is still early here in the East, even earlier in the West, and we are going to continue to cover President Biden's decision to step down for re-election for President of the United States. I'm going to hand over our coverage now to CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell in Washington. Norah?
Christine Johnson, thank you. We are coming on the air at this hour as President Joe Biden has decided to drop out of the 2024 race for the White House on Sunday, just a short time ago, releasing a statement to the American people saying over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation with the strongest economy in the world, but that he has decided to instead endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris, in this effort to try and defeat Donald Trump. Want to bring in Margaret Brennan, who is the host of Face the Nation, as well as Robert Costa, who's with me as well. And Margaret, I understand you've been speaking with some people inside the Biden camp.
We have, because President Biden made this decision in a very small group of advisors. They kept this very, very quiet. And from the calls I've made so far, there is an appeal to say, please don't make this about the process. Focus on the legacy of Joe Biden, that he made this decision in what he views the best interest of the country. That is, he finally heard the message that for 3 weeks now, Democrats have been saying quietly and increasingly more loudly, as they did earlier today, on Face the Nation, Joe Manchin, Dean Phillips, others joining the chorus of lawmakers saying that the president has lost the faith of the Congress and lawmakers and that he needed to pass on that torch. What he is stepping aside to do now with this endorsement of Kamala Harris, which he did all via social media. We haven't heard from the president directly. I understand we will in the coming days. But this is a message to quickly respond to the cacophony of voices telling him that he may lose this election versus Donald Trump. Now, we know from our polling data at CBS News that in a hypothetical head-to-head, Kamala Harris trails Donald Trump by 3 points. Joe Biden trailed by 5 points. That is, of course, where we are in the race right now. This focus, this onslaught will turn towards her. Republicans already coming out and saying that Joe Biden's endorsement of Kamala Harris without reopening a primary process somehow looks rigged, somehow denies the vote that primary voters set earlier on in the race we've had to date. So you are about to see an onslaught aimed at the vice president and to undermine faith in the process, the primary process and the selection here. But in this moment in time, it is worth noting that Joe Biden has come to a very painful decision. for a 50-year legacy in Washington at such a consequential time, having passed bipartisan legislation, having faced a world in crisis, and by the way, about to go face-to-face with a world leader. And trying to broker a Middle East peace.
Right. The President of the United States saying, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I want to bring in Robert Costa. And Robert, obviously a very difficult decision for President Biden to make. He has been in elected office for some 52 years, has a tight-knit group of supporters. They were pushing very hard to try and stay in this race, just as early as yesterday, saying he's going to be back out on the campaign trail next week. He's going to be meeting with the Israeli prime minister that's here in town. What changed?
This is a seismic political moment, a historic moment for this country. The first time since March 31st, 1968, that an incumbent president has decided to step away from the nomination. That same year, 1968, the Democrats were having their convention in Chicago, just like they will be in Chicago this year. For Democrats, this was about a pressure campaign on a president who was insisting that he wanted to stay in the race until the 11th hour last night. Based on my conversations with his confidants, his family was urging him to stay. First Lady Jill Biden, Sister Valerie Biden, son Hunter Biden. They believed, as he believed, that he could beat former President Donald Trump. But as Margaret said, he has been in politics since he was elected to the Senate in 1972. He has a political antenna. He saw the pressure rising. This was not something he wanted to do. But he was talking through with his advisors, Mike Donnellan and so many others like Anita Dunn, and saying, if I do get out, what do I do? Do I get behind Vice President Harris? Ultimately, there was a decision for party unity to make sure that endorsement was quick. It came today. He's not making a statement, I'm told, today on camera because he is still recovering from COVID. He's in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware right now. This is a personal retreat for him, a place where he goes for contemplation very often for many weekends. And I can't underscore enough what Margaret said. This was painful for President Biden. He loves being in the political arena. Now stepping out. He will not resign the presidency. He says he will serve his term that ends in January 2025 as he continues to manage foreign policy and domestic policy. This raises questions now about how former President Trump will respond. We're standing by for a statement from his campaign and his top advisors. At the same time, there will be a lot of speculation in the coming days about who will be on the vice presidential slot for the Democrats. Will it be a governor like Roy Cooper? Could it be Secretary Pete Buttigieg? California Governor Gavin Newsom, unlikely to be that pick. It's unusual in American history due to the Constitution to have two people from the same state.
Robert Costa, thank you. At this hour, we are covering this breaking news as President Biden has decided to drop out of the 2024 race. He has endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris, to succeed him. But it is worth noting that there have been a number of elected Democrats who have favored an open nominating process. The Democratic convention is in Chicago in the middle of August. So there is time still for Kamala Harris to try and wrap this up. But the nominating process begins again shortly, so there is much still up in the air. Let's go now to our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes, at the White House with new reporting. Nancy?
Nora, I can tell you that as of last night, senior officials here at the White House and senior Democratic officials outside the White House were still being told that President Biden was in it to win it and that he wasn't going anywhere, despite all the Democratic calls for him to step down. And then that bombshell came just a couple of hours ago that actually he was going to be getting out after all, which indicates that if he was mulling this over, it was with his family, maybe a very small circle of aides, but that was being kept away from most in the Democratic orbit writ large, because it is obviously a very difficult decision, one that he resisted for quite some time. But clearly, he and those right around him decided that it was just too difficult to try to push back against this growing wave of Democratic lawmakers in particular who were urging him to step aside.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. And what kind of challenges does the vice president face?
Well, she's got 3.5 months to mount a presidential bid, which would be difficult for anyone. Yes, she has the Biden campaign war chest. Yes, she has the Biden campaign operation. But, you know, she has 3.5 months at the top of this ticket to convince the American people that she is the best person for the job. And that is just something that is very difficult to do. She has to sort of spring in there on day one. She does not necessarily have anywhere near the same size of a team within the White House that the president does. And she's got to try to, you know, get all around the country and make her presence known and convince the American people that she has what it takes to do the job. A couple of weeks ago at his press conference, I asked President Biden whether he thought Kamala Harris was ready on day one to be president of the United States. And he said, yes, he believes she is. That's why he chose her. He pointed to her ability to hit the road all over the country, talking about reproductive rights, an issue that's very important to Democrats. He talked about her history as a prosecutor, something that she definitely brought to bear in her years in the Senate, on the Senate Judiciary Committee. But now she has to take those attributes and the campaign has to take those attributes and sort of refocus the entire message, not just the message of the campaign, but also the message at the convention coming up in just a few weeks. Everything has to change to reorient against someone who, while she has served here in the White House with President Biden for the past 4 years, is a very different person with very different strengths. And that entire campaign machine has to reorient around her.
CBS News is doing a lot of reporting, and I want to make sure we get to all of the new information that is just coming in. Robert Costa, I know you have something new you want to share with us.
Yes. So sources close to several of the people who might be considered possible challengers to Vice President Harris for the nomination, people close to California Governor Gavin Newsom, people close to Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, all saying they're preparing to stand down. They do not believe that Democrats will challenge Vice President Kamala Harris at the convention in Chicago. Already in this immediate aftermath of President Biden's momentous decision, you see behind the scenes Democratic consolidation. The real race will be for vice presidential nomination on the Democratic side. But it is intriguing to me as a reporter that there's no one at this moment preparing behind the scenes to challenge Vice President Harris.
That's right. Governor Gretchen Whitmer just saying, with Biden out, my job in this election will remain the same, doing everything I can to help elect Democrats and stop Donald Trump. She wrote that on social media, so she will not get in the way of Kamala Harris seeking this Democratic Party nomination.
And my sources agree with yours in terms of not seeing a head-to-head challenger. But the question then becomes, who is the person who stands beside her August 19th at that Democratic convention to seek the nomination in that vice president role? That's where the focus is. Anyone, I was told, looking to challenge her would be committing political suicide to try to go head to head after Joe Biden had been so key in making it very clear just within minutes of announcing he was not going to seek re-election that he was endorsing her. So that's what we're looking at now.
In a moment, let's talk about who those potential vice presidential picks will be. But first, I do want to touch base with Willie James Inman. He is in Delaware. And I know, Willie, you have some reaction from the Biden family. Willie?
Hey there, Nora. Good to be with you. Well, the Biden family is reacting to this seismic news today. Jill Biden, she reposted the president's statement and she put a heart emoji, so sending her love to her husband. We know that the First Lady has been with the president as he's recovering from COVID-19 here in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. We also are seeing some reaction from the president's granddaughter, Naomi Biden, who said, quote, "I'm nothing but proud today of my pop," referring to her nickname, of course, for the president there. And I want to bring up some reaction as well from Frank Biden, the president's younger brother, who tells ABC News that his brother's decision to step down out of the race boils down to his overall health and vitality, but also beating this genuine threat to our nation in the form of Donald Trump. Some reaction there from the Biden family, of course, who have been close with the president in coming to this decision that we are seeing today, Nora.
Willie James Inman, thank you. It is now the top of the hour, 3 o'clock here on the East Coast, and we are coming on the air with this breaking news. The historic decision by President Joe Biden announcing that he will not seek re-election, that he is dropping out of the presidential campaign, and that he is throwing his support behind his Vice President, Kamala Harris. The president, in a statement, saying, "We have made great progress as a nation and that it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." The president also indicating that he will speak to the nation later this week and have more detail about his decision. Let's go now to our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes, at the White House with new details. Nancy?
Nora, you just read from that letter that the president sent and that went out publicly at 1:45 this afternoon. Well, I've just learned from a top White House official that senior campaign and White House officials were informed of his decision right before that letter went out. He said he'd been reflecting on it for the past couple of days and that this information was closely held. We still don't have much timing on when the president plans to make an address to the public. Keep in mind, he's still got COVID. He is isolating at his home in Rehoboth, but I'm told it should be sometime later this week.
And Nancy, what about the vice president? I understand that she was just in Cape Cod at a multi-million-dollar fundraiser. Where is she today? What's happening inside her group of advisors? She has had to be so careful these past 3 weeks to be out there on the trail campaigning as if nothing has changed. At no point did she want to look like she was gunning for this job or hoping for the president to step aside, and yet she had to continue to be a vigorous campaigner pushing for the Biden-Harris ticket. And I anticipate that she is going to continue to, not want to get out ahead of the president. She has to now launch into a lightning sprint between now and Election Day, and yet with the president holed up with COVID, she's going to want to be very careful until he's had his opportunity to get out there and explain in a more fulsome way to the American people why he has decided to step aside and why he has decided to throw the weight of his support behind Kamala Harris. Nancy Cordes at the White House, thank you for that perspective and new reporting. Robert Costa is here. Robert?
I've been texting and speaking with members of the inner circle of Vice President Harris. She is now perhaps the most important political figure in the United States. The assumed Democratic nominee, the first female to serve as the Democratic presidential nominee since Secretary Hillary Clinton in 2016. Her team and her closest friends are telling CBS News this afternoon that she is prepared to be the nominee to take on former President Trump at a debate, that they believe she is a strong debater, that she proved her chops when she was on the Senate Judiciary Committee grilling nominees for the Supreme Court, and that she was a prosecutor in California going back to her days in San Francisco. Her inner circle said she has been careful in recent days, but she has also been thinking ahead to the possibility as these calls and discussions have picked up speed. She expects former President Obama, President Biden in particular, to be out on the campaign trail for her. And there's also a belief right now inside Vice President Harris's inner circle that they could put former President Trump on the ropes, that he has so far in the past few days attacked her on personal characteristics, attacked her laugh at his latest campaign rally, called her Laughin' Kamala Harris. And they believe those kind of attacks, which are personal, will not stick with the kind of swing voters that are ultimately perhaps going to decide this election in the key battleground states.
Robert Costa, thank you. Also with us, checking in with many of his sources, Ed O'Keefe. And Ed, what can you tell us at this hour?
Nora, good to be with you. There is a meeting underway of the Democratic National Committee senior leadership amid the unexpected news, at least unexpected to many of them. There was a meeting going on this afternoon that was designed to sort of put the finishing touches on the convention planning, which is 4 weeks from tomorrow. But they did not get enough heads up, and in this meeting weren't able to at least address this. But we know that the DNC chairman, Jamie Harrison, convened his top brass very quickly. And in that other meeting, when the word came, said he was quite emotional about it. They have put out a statement here just a moment ago, and let me read from this this because these are the people that are going to have to set out the rules of the road for the next few weeks. It says in part, Democrats are prepared and united in our resolve to win in November. As we move forward to formally select our party's nominee, our values as Democrats remain the same. He says later, we have and will continue to make this case to the American people. The American people will hear from the Democratic Party on next steps in the path forward for the nomination process. In other words, they don't quite yet know what to do. While the president has endorsed the vice president, to Bob's point earlier, that many may be standing down, given that announcement, there's a few reasons for that. One, you only got 4 weeks left. And that's a gargantuan task to try to take on a sitting vice president who's sitting on roughly $200 million, give or take, maybe less than that now, because her name is on the campaign's official title. Technically, a handful of money would go to her. And so she could use that conceivably in these next 4 weeks should she be challenged. Keep an eye instead on the race for running mate. There are a handful of governors who I've learned this afternoon have been contacted. The one I know for certain, at least in a reportable way, is the New Jersey governor, Phil Murphy, who is among those fielding inquiries and entertaining them, in part reminding people that he has a foreign policy background, given he was once ambassador to Germany. Others that will be considered include the governors of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, potentially Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, and governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker is the kind of guy that if he really wanted to, could cut himself a $200 million check and mount a challenge himself. But the early word from his staff is they didn't know either. We do now know also, Nora, real quick, that he did inform at least a handful of people before this letter went out over social media. There was one senior party official who said he got a call from someone close to the president, made clear he was going to do this and intended to nominate or to endorse the vice president. So there was some early heads up given to a small handful of senior party leadership responsible for the order of things, raising money, operations and whatnot. We know over at the White House, however, that many staffers learned about this the way the rest of the world did over social media. Nora.
And let me ask you about this, Ed, and I think we could all sort of discuss this. It's my understanding, though, that the rules at the convention, President Biden cannot simply transfer the nomination to his running mate. He drops out of the race. There are some almost 4,000 Democratic delegates now that were selected, that were bound to President Biden, that they are now essentially free agents. Now, Biden-Harris is the name of the campaign. She will get the, tens and millions of dollars that have been donated to the campaign. But is there a threat to her getting the nomination?
So what is the situation now is people have run for delegate across the country. And if they ran as Biden delegates, they are now what is called pledged delegates ahead of the convention in Chicago. It's important to note that if you are a pledged delegate, you are elected in our system, but it is by no means legally binding. So to your point, yes, legally speaking, is there an opening for someone to come in on a first ballot vote that is somewhat fluid and say, I want the pledged delegates to walk away from their pledge? Yes, that's very possible. And someone could mount a candidacy saying, I want people on the first ballot to discard their pledge. But this is a political process where these delegates are under enormous pressure to follow through in the faith of the Biden campaign, politically speaking. And if President Biden is now directing his delegates, essentially, to go with Vice President Harris, they could move in a different direction. But there's no one now making a move against Vice President Harris, and it would take a real insider who could pull and yank pledged delegates away from President Biden's decision. And remember, these people who run for delegates are the most loyal Democrats to Biden in the country. So to your point, it is possible someone could challenge her, but not likely.
And you have called this political suicide, Margaret, based on what people have said to you. Who would challenge? What could be the first black woman and Asian American to become president of the United States? What would that mean for the disunity that already exists in the Democratic Party? Is there a collective thought that they must now unite as a party in order to defeat Donald Trump?
There is a desire to take this public embarrassment that has been the past 3 weeks of disarray and dispute within the party, and in the next 3 weeks be able to clean it up so that at the convention they can shift the conversation to unity and to messaging. They just saw a very well-orchestrated Republican National Convention and a message of Republican unity there after, during a primary where the Republicans were not united. So the emphasis here from those I've spoken to so far is at least there is the intention to try to make this about issues, to try to make this about next generation, about fresh blood, about understanding, and that there's a lot of focus on who that vice presidential selection would be to join Kamala Harris on this ticket. Bob made a great point earlier in terms of that backbone of the Democratic Party, Black women. And that is about really leaning into the strength there, not wanting to in any way undercut the vice president. But they know they have a problem with the working class, the white working class male vote. There is going to be a real focus on trying to bring that in. When we talk about some of these names that are being floated, whether it's the Kentucky governor, Andy Beshear, or the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, those are states where there is this emphasis on can they speak to that vote. You see their possible vice presidential picks. This is speculative at this point. It is going to be Kamala Harris.
Well, it's more than speculative. It's already happening. We're getting reporting at CBS News, someone close to Vice President Harris telling CBS they would like to see Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer picked as the vice presidential nominee. This is one of her longtime allies to double down as a female ticket against former President Donald Trump, who has been found liable of rape in civil court, who has had different allegations thrown at him in many decades. So there's already a feverish activity behind the scenes to get people on the ticket. This is tough. This is a compressed time window, and it's amazing to me how just within minutes people are setting up their camps to try to get on the ticket. But we have to come back to the point. While as political reporters, I'm highly interested in who is the running mate for Vice President Harris. The most important thing now is the President of the United States has said he will back his vice president for the presidency. And the vice president, who is a former Attorney General, California senator, is now likely going to be the Democratic nominee. This is a lot like 1968 when President Johnson pushed Hubert Humphrey towards the nomination. Presidents are using their political capital in these moments.
And what will quickly follow in a sign of Kamala Harris's strength is if the Obamas come forward and say that she is the best person to move the Democratic Party forward. What will the Clintons do next? That would be a way that could quickly send a signal to the Democratic Party that they want her to be the nominee.
Obama's allies tell CBS News there's no doubt he is going to be supportive. Think about this. Vice President Harris got to know then Senate candidate Obama when he was a state senator running for the U.S. Senator in 2004. He would come to California for fundraisers and got to know this rising star in San Francisco named Kamala Harris. They became so close that when he ran for the presidency, as a Californian, she flew to Iowa to campaign for then candidate Obama. They are close personal friends. It would be shocking if he didn't go out there again and again for her.
But to your point, Nora, there is concern among some Democrats I've spoken to that this cannot look like a coronation. This cannot look like what happened at the Republican convention, where unity was really sublimating to Donald Trump. There is a part of the party that wants to see this look open, transparent, and have
the Senator Bernie Sanders wing will be watching this all. He has not issued a statement yet, at least to CBS News. Senator Bernie Sanders and that progressive wing have not always had a perfect relationship politically with Vice President Harris. Watch what Senator Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York do. If the progressives fall in line, it's all hers politically, based on our reporting.
I want to bring in Ashley Etienne. She's the former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and is now a CBS News political contributor. Ashley, so good to have you on this historic day. What can you tell us about what is happening behind the scenes where the vice president is at this hour?
Absolutely, Nora. It is an incredible day in American history. I just remember, Margaret's on with you. We were on Face Nation maybe 2 years ago, and the question then was whether or not she was going to be on the ticket with Joe Biden, and now she's at the top of the ticket. So much has changed in such a short period of time. It's incredible, but there's a level of excitement within the party and definitely within her own office. So now the question is, what are the plans going forward? How do we piece this together now going forward in a way that sort of stops the bleeding among these key stakeholders that the party's focused on? One, she's already started to make calls with fundraisers, so that's headed down the path. There's now plans for leadership on the Hill to get on conference calls today, conference calls tomorrow. Does she go to the Hill? Does the president pass the torch officially, publicly, in a way that shows that he's fully endorsing her? These are all the questions now that they're trying to figure out behind the scenes. Does he do it in a formal way at a podium, passes the torch to her? Does she deliver big remarks? The other outstanding question is this: is he going to continue? Is he going to put forth a lot of effort to secure those pledged delegates that you guys were just mentioning? Is he going to get on the phone, and is his team going to get on the phone with those folks and say, listen, we've got a plan. We've decided as a party, we need to be unified. Our unity is our strength. We need to get behind Kamala Harris and move forward and focus our attention on Donald Trump. So what's happening behind the scenes is hyper focus on what are the next steps, and then how do we stop the bleeding among those key stakeholder groups?
Ashley Etienne, thank you. And just moments after I said we're waiting to hear from the Clintons and the Obamas, the statement from President Clinton and Secretary Clinton released, noting that they endorse Vice President Harris and will do whatever we can to support her. The Clintons going on to say in this joint statement, we've lived through many ups and downs, but nothing has made us more worried for our country than the threat posed by a second Trump term. He has promised to be a dictator on day one, say the Clintons, and the recent ruling by his servile Supreme Court will only embolden him to further shred the Constitution. Now is the time to support Kamala Harris and fight with everything we've got to elect her. And then they end with this, the Clintons saying, America's future depends on it. Pretty strong statement from the Clintons, throwing their support behind Kamala Harris, noting what many people agree is a historic presidential election, perhaps the most important in generations, and what a wild couple of weeks it has been. Beginning with that disastrous debate by President Biden, then the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, in which he miraculously survives and is barely hit with that bullet, a unified Republican convention, which we all just came back from, and his choice of this younger Senator J.D. Vance, who is from Ohio, spent his summers in Kentucky, and has been picked to try and court the white working class vote. However, there is already an effort underway, of course, to go back and look at J.D. Vance's record. The way he talked about the white working class in Hillbilly Elegy wasn't always complimentary. And so there certainly will be a discussion about that coming forward. And I think the Democratic Party and sources that I have spoken with, the reason that they pushed President Biden so hard is that they believe he was not vigorous enough in his pointing out and debating the record and the rhetoric being put forward by Donald Trump.
That's true. But also at this moment, there's a lot of anger among some of President Biden's closest friends. I can't emphasize enough how they feel he was pushed, and that while Democrats might on the surface be celebrating Vice President Harris's likely nomination in the coming days, there is a lot of fury among those closest to President Biden that he was forced to make this decision under pressure from allies of former President Obama, from allies of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, from major Democratic donors. So expect in the coming days for Democrats to lock arms. We will see a cascade of statements in the next few minutes and hours of every major Democrat likely coming out and offering support for Vice President Harris, unless they're thinking about challenging her for the nomination, which we've reported is very unlikely at this hour. At the same time, watch what President Biden does in the coming days. He will be forceful, I'm told, by people at the White House to be out there on the campaign trail for her, and they don't blame her inside of the Biden inner circle for what has happened. But this is a Democratic Party that's at a fragile political moment. They do not feel that this was played in the perfect way for an 81-year-old president who has battled through so much. And so everyone's watching exactly how statements are made and how people use their time, their money, and their political capital.
Thank you. I want to point out that we are just hearing now from Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker Emeritus, in a statement saying President Joe Biden is a patriotic American who has always put our country first. In her words, his legacy of vision, values, and leadership make him one of the most consequential presidents in American history. She has not endorsed Kamala Harris in this statement, but notably praising the legacy of Joe Biden and applauding his decision to put our country first. We are now joined by the co-chair of the Biden-Harris campaign, Senator Chris Coons. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Great to be on with you. This is a critical moment in American history, and I hope today that we can focus on Joe Biden's incredible legacy of service to our nation. 50 years. He has been serving us in the Senate as vice president, as president. And today he's made a very difficult decision in the best interest of our nation to continue serving as president, to continue rolling up his sleeves and tackling the challenges that still lie ahead of us in the next 6 months, but to step aside in terms of the nomination of my party for president in order to make certain that Donald Trump is not returned to the White House. I admire, I respect, I love Joe Biden. I have worked my heart out for him on this campaign. And while this was a very hard decision, I deeply respect how it is a continuation of his lifetime of putting our country before himself. Joe Biden is the toughest fighter I've ever met. Every time he's been knocked down, he's always got up again. And the challenge of seeing this moment and of recognizing what was in the best interest of the nation was a significant challenge. I still believe he could have beaten Donald Trump, but I also know that what he's done today is in the best interests of our nation.
And Senator, what now is happening with Vice President Harris? When will we hear next from her?
I don't know her schedule today or when she'll come on TV, but what matters is that President Biden has made an historic, a brave and important decision that we should reflect on his legacy and his leadership, which is the legacy of the Biden-Harris administration. As you know, I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee. We've confirmed more than 200 federal judges under the Biden-Harris administration. Vice President Harris, who served with me in the Senate on the Judiciary Committee, was a critical part of getting every one of those judges confirmed. She's been a key part of the successes at home and abroad of the Biden-Harris legacy, and I think she is best positioned to carry it forward. Joe Biden, our president, spoke to that just moments ago in endorsing her. I do hope that we'll take some time today and reflect on the fact that Joe Biden is someone who in the Senate, as vice president, as president, has earned a legacy among the most important, impactful, effective presidents in our entire nation's history. And there's lots more to do. Just this coming week, he will continue to work to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza, a hostage release and return, a path forward for the resolution of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza. He is someone who spent 50 years being prepared to lead our nation in this moment in Ukraine and with our NATO allies, in the Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East. And he's got 6 more months of service to complete as our president and as the most respected, most senior leader of our party.
Senator,
I look forward to campaigning hard alongside him this fall and to working with him in the Senate.
Senator, at this hour, we know that President Biden has endorsed his vice president to be the Democratic nominee. We have also heard from the Clintons in a joint statement saying they would like Kamala Harris to be the Democratic nominee. Do you expect there to be any challenge to the vice president?
Well, today I think we should focus on the legacy of Joe Biden as president. I do recognize the urgency of the moment. As we head towards our convention in Chicago in August, I think the most important thing we can do is come together. And Vice President Harris has an incredible legacy of success and accomplishment as a senator and vice president. I do not expect a serious challenge to her nomination, but let's let that work itself out in the coming weeks and focus today on what a big contribution to our nation our president has made. He's been my mentor. He's been my friend. I am proud of him as a Delawarean, a Democrat, and an American. And I hope the folks who have been raising lots of questions and issues in the last few weeks will do what they said they would do and recognize his leadership, his legacy, and come together to support the nominee of the Democratic Party so that we come out of Chicago united. Donald Trump is a unique threat to the future of our nation.